cool. I want to talk about the Hindu gods today. We can talk about Hinduism broadly, but it's such a massive tradition. I'm only now in my semester, I'm teaching a course on religions of the East. I'm only now finishing talking about Hinduism. So we haven't even gotten to Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism, these other traditions that I talk about in that class, because it is such a vibrant and extensive tradition that very unique in a lot of ways. I love teaching it because of its uniqueness. Unlike a lot of religious traditions we're familiar with, it doesn't have a founder, doesn't have a particular period of time that you can say that's when it began or didn't, because it has just grown and changed so dramatically over millennia of time. The earliest texts we can talk about relating to Hinduism are the Vedas, which go back to about 1750 BCE, right? So yeah, a good almost 4,000 years old. In fact, some portions of it are probably even older than that. Oh, Melissa, if you can go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. Oh, that's quite fast. So what I really want to do is just kind of tell you a bunch of stories about some of these famous Hindu gods that are found all over. I even mentioned earlier about how we really don't even know how many Hindu gods there are. Some traditions claim, like this classic collection of texts called the Upanishads, claim that there are 33 million Hindu gods. So that's a lot. I'm not going to go through all of them. I've got a handful. Of the more famous, the more familiar ones, the ones that you'll find in some form or another, really across the subcontinent of India. And in fact, in that lovely video earlier with the nice music and the chanting in Hindi, a lot of those gods are who I'm going to talk about today. I kept recognizing them. I was like, oh, there's Krishna, there's Ram, there's Vishnu, and of course also Ganesh. I think Ganesh is pretty recognizable. Who's seen this guy before? Yeah. What comes to mind, out of curiosity? What comes to mind when you see this figure?
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Why the head? I'll talk about that. Yeah. Anything else? Elephant. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But a male body.
Yes. A rotund fellow. Yeah. He's a what?
He was a child.
He was a child. Yes. Oh, do you know the story? Yeah. What comes to mind?
Oh, when I see.
Yeah.
That it's kind of sad.
Yeah. So I'll talk about it in a moment. What I would like for those also at home to join along, but here I'm going to teach you a very simple Sanskrit mantra. Right? We've all heard of mantras before, right? Mantra, which are these formulas, acoustic formulas of great power, right? So the one for Ganesha is fairly simple, and it is Om Ganeshaya Namaha. So I'm going to have you say that. Om Ganeshaya Namaha. And it simply means in the name of Ganesh. Right? Namaha, that word, that's cognate. It's the same as the English word name, because Sanskrit itself as an Indo-European language. So there's it's very closely related to like Latin, right? Very similar kind of structures. It's just harder. And so for Ganesh, that's how you would kind of praise him. That's how you would bring him to your attention for good reason, because he is the Lord of obstacles, not to mean that he causes them, but that he is good for stopping them. This is why you're probably so familiar with him, not only because his head is very remarkable and memorable, but rather that he is recited everywhere. You'll see him in little roadside shrines all over India. You'll see him in Hindu homes quite frequently, because he's the one you go to and you praise or you pray to if you're starting off on a new business venture, if you're starting school, if you're starting the new year, if you're starting some kind of new thing, whatever it is, something that could possibly bring obstacles with it, as all things can, that's who you go to. And Ganesh, he's great. He's very large, so we can break through those big obstacles. But what about the small ones? Can you see just down at the bottom? Technically, he's got a little mouse to ride, and that mouse is good for the small obstacles. Yeah, so they cover everything from big to small. Ganesh is great at the outset of anything new, right? For beginnings, and also for anything that could have obstacles to it. But he is also the son of Shiva and Parvati. And the story goes, he's actually more technically Parvati's son, because one day while Shiva is out meditating, he does that all day in the wilderness, off on his own, leaves his wife at home. She kind of wanted time to herself. She wanted some me time, kind of some self-care. She was going to kind of have a bath all day, a little spa treatment. So she creates Ganesh to be her guard and creates him really just out of the dirt and says, okay, you stand guard in front. Don't let anybody in. I don't want to be disturbed at all. I don't care who it is. Ganesh is like, okay. So he's out there, and Shiva naturally comes home after that hard day of meditating in the wilderness like you do. And he wants to see his wife. And so he goes up to the entrance, and he's stopped by this child. And he goes, sorry, you can't see her. He goes, well, but she's my wife. I can see her. Like, okay, fine. No one else can see her, but I can see her. She's my wife. He goes, no, I was given instructions. No one's allowed to see her. And they argue about this back and forth. And Shiva's known for his short temper, among other things. So as the argument escalates, he cuts off his head, cuts off the child's head. And Parvati comes out, and it's kind of funny. And the way that it's represented in the text, she doesn't seem that bent out of shape. Like, you'd probably be horrified otherwise. But maybe it's because they're gods that she's like, Shiva, what did you do? How'd you? Why? I'm sorry. That trundles by. I'm going to take their head and that's how he gets his head. And I guess he's okay after that. I don't know how mind transfer works out, whatever the logic is there, but either way, that's why Ganesh has an elephant head. Because vast majority of the gods aren't animalistic. There are a couple of them that are, like Ganesh. There's a monkey god called Hanuman that's very, very famous. But for the most part, these gods are human-like, even if they have multiple heads and multiple arms. And if you're curious about why that is, we can talk about that during the Q&A. Oh, Melissa, next. Next slide.
She's gone.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Awesome. I don't want to stay too much on this. I want to get back to the pictures because I'm a visual learner, so I find those more fun. Yeah, but this is just to give you a little bit of background of where we even know this information from. Because as I've mentioned, Hinduism is ancient, right? Millennia old, and scholars even kind of disagree on when we can say officially Hinduism began. Because what it looks like today, how Hinduism is practiced today, looks very different than how it was 3,000 years ago, which is kind of true of any religious tradition. It's going to change. But the gods that are popular today only really that possesses all of these stories of the gods that are told today are called the Puranas. And they only start to be composed around 300 CE. Right, so less than 2,000 years ago. And then they continue to be composed for the next millennium until around 1200 CE. That's about 800 years ago is when a lot of that literature gets finalized, right? So if you did want to learn these stories, this is how I learn these stories, other than talking with my Hindu friends, this is where you would go to. And not all of them, most of them have not been translated into English, but a couple of them have, at least portions. Next slide. Perfect. So when you dive into these texts, who are some of the major gods that you find? And three of the most important and ubiquitous and famous are termed the Trimurti, the three forms, the three images. And they are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. They're on the right, and pretty much in that order. They're kind of like a major trinity in Hinduism, although of course it means something different than in the Catholic context or Christian context. So with these major figures, they're the ones kind of responsible for the state of the world from start to finish. And in Hinduism, I should make it clear, there's truly, ultimately, a belief that there's no real beginning or real end, that time is infinite, that it has always been and always will be, but it is cyclical. So the world or the universe as we know it will come through these phases of being created, of maintaining and persisting and then being destroyed, only for it to be created anew again. And so these three gods are responsible for those major phases. So you have Brahma there on the left. He's got four heads, each one reciting one of the four Vedas in one of the cardinal directions. I mean, it's kind of awkward since it's a two-dimensional image. They kind of have to represent the fourth head sort of sticking out on the right there. You see how he's got like two faces, but really it's actually supposed to be the very back facing the opposite as the front face, right? One in each of the four directions. But either way, they're all reciting one of the four Vedas. So that's his one job. He's the creator. When there's nothing but the void, he brings the universe into existence, and then he's kind of done. He's sort of a deistic figure. He's made the world, and now he can chill. Exactly. Yeah. For that reason, Brahma, as important as he is for creating the known universe, he's not really revered all that much, not overtly. There aren't a lot of temples dedicated to him. In fact, I heard there's actually really just one temple dedicated to him in all of South Asia. That's huge because there are a lot of temples. There's a lot. There's thousands of temples in South Asia, all over the Indian subcontinent. So Brahma just has the one because, again, he's done his job. You don't really need to go to him. He might be in certain praises here and there, but he's not very actively worshipped the way that the other two gods are, Vishnu and Shiva. Vishnu is the preserver. So as the world persists, he stops kind of adharma, as it's called, this sort of improper activity from growing too great. And I'm going to talk about him a lot. And then Shiva is there when ultimately the bad does become too great. The world needs to be destroyed. Shiva comes down and does just that. He's not an evil god. That might be your first impression. Is that, well, he's a destroyer, so that can't be good. But no, he's doing and of destruction. It's called the dance of destruction. So he's often represented in that moment of destroying all the ignorance and evil of the world as this Lord of the dance. That's what that image is right there on that wall. That green image, that's Shiva as the Lord of the dance. It's called Nataraja. Nataraja. Raja means king, right? We've all heard that word, right? Raja, from Latin. So yeah, that's Shiva. That's an image of Shiva specifically as this Lord of the dance. He's surrounded by kind of a wheel of fire. Those are all flames emanating out as he does his dance. Next slide, Melissa. So, but before we get to Shiva, I want to talk briefly about Vishnu's forms. So Vishnu, being the preserver, is the one that comes down in human form, or various forms, I should say, not just human, in order to save the world from all this adharma. Right? Dharma means sort of proper duty or righteousness, and so adharma is the opposite of that, right? Being evil, basically. So he comes down in all these different forms throughout existence in order to do just that. And he has 10 of them specifically in which he kind of takes on these forms. The word for coming down into the world, by the way, is avatar. Right? That's where we get the word from, actually. There's a number of loan words from Hindi and then originally from Sanskrit. So avatar is the Hindi for avatara. Avatara is the original Sanskrit, and all it literally means is to descend, to come down into the world, and that's what Vishnu does. A lot of the gods can do it. Shiva also can do it, but Vishnu is especially famous for doing that. So he has these what are called Dashavatara, the 10 avatars. So one of them is Matsya, so he comes down as this fish to is Kurma. So he's a turtle. So I'm going to summarize most of them, but I'll stop for one or two and really give you the fun details. If you can pay close enough attention to that image, do you see a turtle anywhere? And some of so that's Vishnu in the form of this turtle named Kurma. And the story is one of the gods, he's actually one of the more ancient Vedic gods. His name's Indra. He's also kind of petulant, kind of capricious. He sort of pisses off the wrong sage one day. And to punish not just him, but all the gods for it, the sage curses them with mortality. So they lose their immortality. Now, there are two kinds of gods in the Hindu pantheon. There are the devas and there are the asuras. And they fight with each other quite often. So they're always at odds with one another. Well, now, and apparently the asuras have always been mortal. So that's one of the ways that they're kind of lesser gods on top of being kind of demonic gods. Well, now the devas are also mortal. And they're panicking about this, right? They're freaking out. They've been very comfortable being immortal all this time, but now they're actually prone to death. So what do the devas do? The deva gods, they kind of form an unsteady and impermanent alliance with the asuras. They say, okay, wait, let's stop fighting for once. Let's work together and let's create nectar of immortality. And if you help us with that so that we can regain our immortality, you can have it too. Right? You can now become immortal. So that's what they do. They go to the ocean of milk. There's an ocean of milk. And they take a giant mountain called Mangala and they stick it into the silt of the ocean of milk. And they use a giant multi-headed snake, because they got that too, named Vasuki, and they wrap it around the mountain to start churning the ocean of milk. That's what this image is showing. It's showing, you can see the evil gods, right? Bad gods, because they look more demonic on the left. And then you have the devas on the right who look, much more kind of glowing. And that's what deva means. It means luminous. And they're churning the mountain. But the problem is, it's being a mountain, it gets stuck in that silt at the bottom of the ocean and can't move anymore. And that's when Vishnu comes down as this turtle to act as the base, right? His shell becomes the base for the mountain. So now they can properly churn that ocean of milk. And they succeed in creating what is called amrita, this nectar of immortality. You can kind of translate it as ambrosia, right? In the Greek myth. Well, the bad gods, the asuras, they trick the good gods by stealing it first. And so Vishnu has to come yet again and trick them to get it back. And so the gods eventually become immortal again. Next slide. What's really cool about this story, especially this myth, is there's a life-size representation of it in the Thailand airport in Bangkok. If anyone's ever flown through Bangkok or been to Bangkok, this you can see Gucci back there, right? There's the Gucci store. But yeah, so you can get your bag and you can look at this nice myth, right? But yeah, this is a life-size image, statue of this myth that just blew me away when I saw it. I'm walking through the airport in my travels years ago, right, in the pre-COVID days. And I saw this. So there are the bad gods, right, the asuras, all kind of multicolored, and the multi-headed snake, that the head's on that side. And then there it is wrapped around the mountain. You can just kind of make out the turtle of Vishnu, and then Vishnu in his true form, kind of overlooking everything. But there it is. And then on the other side, next slide. They're the good gods. They're the devas. And very much in Thai kind of style, right, in terms of the sort of helmets and whatnot. So, but these are all life size, right? Those are about 5 foot, 6 feet tall. So it's just kind of, when you know these stories, when you recognize the iconography, you can encounter it all over the world. And for as much as Thailand is Buddhist, it's a specific form of Buddhism called Theravada Buddhism, there are nonetheless a lot of Hindu gods that are still revered in their temples. So you'll see Ganesha in their temples. You'll see images like that all over. But so next slide. So that's one of the forms of Vishnu. He's got a whole bunch of others. He's got a boar form named Varaha that saves the earth from being stolen away to the cosmic ocean. That is again done by a villain, an asura bad guy named Hiranyaksha. And this family ends up causing problems for Vishnu for a lot of his incarnations. So Hiranyaksha already is not liking Vishnu because his plans are foiled, right? His plot to take down the earth is foiled. So that's what we see in that top image. But then his son, because of that, ends up hating Vishnu. And that's where we see this other form, this incarnation of Vishnu next, called Narasimha, which means literally the man lion, right? So he has a human body, but the head of a lion. And the problem is this this figure, Hiranyakashipu. I love that name, Hiranyakashipu. Yeah, just great. He hates Vishnu because of how Vishnu treated his father. So he bans the worship of Vishnu. And even more of a problem, he's practically invincible. So that's the common theme with a lot of these bad guys, a lot of these asuras or demons that cause problems for the world. They actually built up enough power that the gods have granted them boons, whatever they ask for. And a lot of times they ask to be invulnerable in some fashion or another. So for Hiranyakashipu, the boons he asked for were, I cannot be killed by man or beast. I can't be killed at night or in the day. I can't be killed inside or outside. Solves all these problems. But what does Vishnu do? He's very sneaky. He always comes down in a form that finds that loophole. And that's what happens here. So he comes down as neither a man or a beast, but as both. Right? Comes down as a man beast, right? As a man lion. He kills Hiranyakashipu at dusk, neither day nor night. He does it on his lap, as you can see, so he's not on the ground or in the air. He does it kind of in the antechamber of the palace, so it's not inside or outside. And he uses his own claws, right? So no weapons. So he's sneaky. And then you see this little boy giving a garland of flowers to this vicious form of Vishnu. That's Hiranyakashipu's son. Oh, betrayal. He ends up becoming actually this great devotee of Vishnu. So even while he's murdering his own dad, he's giving praise to Vishnu. Yeah, he's actually really my favorite. I like Kurma, but I like man lion more. Next slide. All right. How much time do I have?
Oh. Yeah, as long as everybody's interested.
Okay.
We're good. Yeah, we got a late start.
I'll try to be kind. So some of the other ones, and I'll breeze through some of these more. The fifth form of Vishnu is this dwarf, a Brahmin dwarf. Brahmin is a kind of the priestly class in Hinduism. This fellow is named Vamana, and he again is dealing with a descendant of that family, that Asura family. This is a guy named Mahabali. He's like the grandson of Hiranyakashipu, grandson or great-grandson. But the thing is, Mahabali, now this Asura king, he's actually a good guy, right? Because, the family did convert to Vishnu worship, they've been pretty good. So Mahabali is actually a very kind king. He's very generous. He's known for his generosity, that whatever his subjects ask of him, he will give them whatever they want. But that can lead to hubris. And Vishnu, kind of seeing the way the winds are blowing, wants to stop that, wants to nip that in the bud. He's like, okay, you're generous and you're really high on yourself for being a generous person. So we got to teach you humility again. So he comes down in this form of a little person, right? Of a dwarf. And he goes before Mahabali. And Mahabali's like, yeah, I can give you anything you want. I have that power. And Vamana says, okay, can you give me the amount of land that I can move, that I can cover in 3 paces? Yeah, that's easy. Yeah,
There's a trick.
Of course, there's always a trick. But this is what Mahabali's thinking. He's like, you're a short little guy, he's probably my height, So he's like, I can give you that land. It's not going to be hard at all. Just do 3 paces. You got it. Vamana then proceeds to grow to astronomical size, becomes this giant cosmic being. And in 1 pace, he goes from the heavens down to the earth. And in the 2nd pace, he goes from the earth down to the underworld. He can't even actually encompass the entirety of known existence in 3 paces. So not only does he cover all of existence, Mahabali cannot technically make good on his promise. He can't actually make 3 paces. So we can't give him that. So what does Mahabali do? He offers his own head as the third pace, as a way of kind of showing contrition. And that's what this image is showing right here. There's that, I kind of like the modern representation of this, where the earth is this globe, and he's just stepping from the earth onto Mahabali's face. The next couple of stories are even more expansive, so I actually won't go into much detail just because of time. But if you have questions, we can talk about it more. There are two great epics in Hinduism that are revered today, not just within Hinduism, but throughout all of South and Southeast Asia. They're the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Has anyone heard of those, out of curiosity? Anyone heard of the Ramayana? Yeah, Joe? What comes to mind?
I don't know the story. It's a long saga, but
Yeah.
we actually sell it at the metaphysical store where I work.
That's
You know,
great.
Copies of, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm like the Ramayana.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's awesome. The more the merrier that it gets that story out there. It's really one of the most famous ones. The Mahabharata is even longer. It's 4 times longer than the Odyssey and the Iliad combined. Yeah, the longest epic in the world. So if you want to read it on a weekend, go for it. Even the English translation is Bulgarized, right? It's condensed, and it's 1,000 pages. So the real, if you did translate the entirety of it, it'd take multiple volumes. A portion of the Mahabharata is a more famous text that you might have heard of called the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh.
Yeah, has anyone heard of that? I just had my students finish reading that.
We sell that too.
You gotta do good. So that is a portion. That's actually part of one chapter of the Mahabharata. It's not even the whole chapter. It's just part of it. But that's a bit more of a famous tale, right? And it involves these kinds of characters. So the Ramayana, for instance, has this main character called Rama, right? And that's why it's called the Ramayana. This is not that Rama. This is a different Rama called Parashurama, Rama with an axe. Next slide. He's a former incarnation of Vishnu that still encounters this next incarnation of Vishnu called Rama. And that's who the story focuses around. So there's like Vishnus all over the place in different forms. The sweet and simple version of that story is that Ram was this prince with a wife named Sita who defeats this great demon king, a different kind of demon called the Rakshasa, who had stolen his wife away. And so he uses a monkey army, that'd be awesome, to help defeat this demon king, right? With his monkey general Hanuman. That's who you see bowing to him at the bottom left. He kind of represents devotion or bhakti. And then so there's Rama, then another character, this great prince named Arjuna is talking to in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is just a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna as his great charioteer. But he also has all of these kinds of figures associated with him. It's kind of funny. They're all very different in personality. If anyone knows Doctor Who, right, the sci-fi show, right? It's kind of like that, where every incarnation also is just very different in terms of personality. Right. So Parashurama, who we saw earlier, he's very angry. He's an angry guy, very short-tempered. Rama, by contrast, is very steadfast, very dharmic, right? Very focused on dharma and what's right, and very cool-tempered. Krishna, by contrast, he's a bit of a playboy. He's a bit of a womanizer. There are fun stories of him growing up, and he really just likes to have a lot of fun with the milkmaids in his village. So they're always out cavorting in the wilderness, in the woods. He's usually dancing with them. There's one fun story where he's dancing with all these milkmaids and kind of trading partners, right, going between them. And they're all getting a little bit angry with him and jealous because they want him to dance with them. So what does Krishna do? He emanates from his body multiple forms of himself. So they all have a Krishna to dance with. That's handy. But the milkmaid that he was in love with the most, it kind of becomes his lover over time, is Radha. That's who we see right there. So often when you see him with a woman, it's Krishna and Radha. They're sort of the cosmic lovers, right? Next slide. The ninth and the last one that's been around, ninth incarnation, ninth avatar of Vishnu, is one you've maybe heard of as well. And that's the Buddha, the Buddha Siddhartha. Yeah. So what's really kind of funny, so how many of you know that there's a Hindu temple in Castleberry? You've seen it.
I've seen it.
Steve, you've seen it?
I've been there.
You've been there. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't, for those who don't know, yeah, in Castleberry, right, which is what, maybe an hour away from here? Yeah, okay, less than that. There's this beautiful South Indian style Hindu temple. And with the mountains and everything that they did a great job. There's all these wonderful shrine spaces in there. When I teach my upper level Hinduism course, I'll take my students there. It's like a little field trip on a weekend. They're very, very welcoming. They're happy to kind of share. I have a good friend there, Varinder, who will do tours. And so he will take us around and kind of do his spiel. Well, what's really funny is when we look at the different incarnations of Vishnu who are portrayed in some of the statues and sculptures in there, he'll get to the Buddha and be like, oh, the Buddha also taught the Dharma. Dharma can mean also like religious teaching. And, because Vishnu came down in order to show that all kinds of teachings can still point to the ultimate truth. It's a very nice conciliatory explanation. It's not the original. That's very sweet now. That's what's said. And Hinduism is incredibly inclusivistic. But the earliest texts say that he actually came down, Vishnu came down as the Buddha to teach a false doctrine, to figure out who his real believers were. It was a way of separating the wheat from the chaff kind of thing, right? So he does it to trick his disciples, his devotees. Yeah. And the ones who weren't fooled by it, that stuck with Vishnu, they knew what's right. So very kind of funny backlash there.
So you said you'll do a Q&A?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's do that.
Q&A will be a lot of fun. So Siddhartha, for whatever reason, whether for good or for ill, is this final form or this ninth incarnation of Vishnu that's come down to earth so far. There's a 10th one, right? There's 10 of them. He hasn't come yet. This is the future and last avatar that will appear at the end of the world. So he will be kind of like the harbinger to Shiva, right? Shiva's going to be the actual destroyer, but he'll come down as this figure named Kalki, who sort of will destroy the last of the evil before the world is finished and rebuilt anew. Next slide. Any questions on Vishnu before I move forward? Shiva. We already talked about him a little bit. He's got a temper. But what's wonderful, again, with all this iconography, all this imagery, you can kind of figure out who's who based on that, right? Someone who's playing a flute and has a woman on his arm, that's probably Krishna with Radha. Someone with a bow and arrow with his wife and his brother, that's Rama with his wife Sita and his brother Lakshman, who always accompanied him throughout the Ramayana. So same thing, Shiva, you can always kind of tell it's him because he's usually wearing very little, kind of a loincloth. And it's usually animal, right? Like a leopard. He has dreads. He's also blue, but for a very different reason. And he has water sprouting from his hair, as you can kind of see. Yeah. You kind of see that little water spout coming out of his hair? Yeah. That's the river Ganges. That's the Ganga, the Ganges River. Because the story was a certain tribe wanted the Ganges to come down from its place in the celestial realm. That's actually what the Milky Way is. Milky Way is supposed to be the cosmic Ganges. And they wanted the water to come down and kind of bless their ancestors, right? Bless their bones. But the water couldn't just come down straight away. Think about a very powerful waterfall. It would obliterate, right, the earth. So Shiva lays his dreads out for the water to meander through and move through to slow down so that it can then come down gently onto the earth. And so that's what you're seeing there represented. So all these fun stories in the imagery alone. By the way, in terms of their body color, the reason why Vishnu is blue, it seems to be just his normal skin tone, but Krishna especially, that name means the dark toned one. And the descriptions in the text say that his skin color is like that of a storm cloud, which I think is beautiful. I love that image. Right? You can picture that so well. So that's Krishna. For Shiva, he's not technically blue, even though that's the pigment that they use to illustrate it. He's actually covered in cemetery ash, in cremated ash, because that's just what meditators in the forest did. We could talk about that. But Shiva has his own personality. In fact, his earlier name, if you want to move forward to him, was the terrible one, or the howler. But in moving kind of forward, next slide. We'll move to, let's go to the one after that, actually, one more. There we go. I saw this picture on the video that you showed before. This is Shiva combined with his wife Parvati. Combined with his wife Parvati. So this is a trait very much associated with Shiva. All the gods kind of have their own consorts, but Shiva is especially known as being this kind of partner to this, to Parvati, to the goddess herself. And so this figure is called Ardhanarishwara. Ardhanarishwara, the Lord who is half female. Because Shiva has this very close connection with the divine feminine principle that is said to kind of undergird all of known existence. This is also very popular in Hindu belief, right? The feminine principle that is inseparable from the male principle. Yeah. Next slide. So this is one thing, and I'll talk about Kali and then I'll talk about Durga to end, because she's really my favorite goddess figure. So you have a lot of goddesses throughout Hindu belief as well, and one really ferocious one is Kali. Does anyone remember Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? Right, Kali Ma. That's who they're revering in that. It's a very problematic film now, but that's who they're focused on. She is this very terrifying, bloodthirsty form of the goddess. And that's the thing about a lot of Hindu goddesses, is they're all representing these myriad kinds of personalities. And so here it's representing that connection with the feminine divine that Shiva has. There he is kind of being stepped on by her. He doesn't seem all that bent out of shape about it. He's got a little bit of a Mona Lisa smile going on. He seems okay with it. And the reason is because he is said to be inert, right? Immovable, without the goddess principle. It's the feminine principle that exists within all reality, that moves things, that motivates, right? So Shiva is motionless without this goddess principle that undergirds the reality. All right, next slide. The last figure I really want to talk about. So I showed you at the start that Trimurti, those three forms, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And I mentioned that Brahma is not really revered all that much. He did his job. He created the world. Good job. All right. Vishnu and Shiva are. The third figure that is revered quite universally across India is the goddess. Right? In these different forms, as Kali or as Parvati, but especially this form of the goddess called Durga. I saw her up there too in one of the slides. Durga. She is the warrior goddess, and she is created by the gods by taking their own individual divine feminine principle, it's called Shakti, and combining them together to form her. So she actually has no male consort. She stands alone, right? She is her own, figure, right? Based on all of these forms. And for that reason, her multiple arms actually possess each of the major weapons that the other gods possess. So she has Shiva's trident. She has what's called a chakra. She has the wheel of Vishnu. She'll hold the Vedas of Brahma in some of her incarnations. And she's created by the gods to defeat this very powerful demon king, another asura, called Mahisha. He's the buffalo demon. Right? And all of, her text, actually, when I studied Sanskrit for my master's at FSU, we translated this text. So it's kind of one of my favorites. It's called the Devi Mahatmya, that talks about this figure. And it's her just battling it out with Mahisha and his different demon armies, one after another. And every time she wins the battle, and fight another day. So there are all these kinds of stories of her defeating these demons. She's battling it out one by one. She's finally at the last battle with Mahisha. And she's standing alone where he is kind of arrayed before her with all of his armies, all of his troops of demons. And he's kind of laughing down at her and said, "Who are you to try to defeat me by yourself?" And wordlessly, I love this scene, wordlessly, she just taps her chest and all of the goddesses emanate from her. She has her army of all these goddesses, and they defeat all the demons, obviously, right? And now then, at the very end of that battle, she's won against all the demons. They've been defeated. It's just Mahisha left. And he sneers at her again and says, oh, but who are you without your army? He tries to gaslight her a little bit, right? Like you're nobody without your army. And again, wordlessly, such a cool scene. Taps her chest. All the goddesses come back into her, and it's her alone. And now she's about to deal the death blow, but she realizes, okay, but he's going to escape again. So I have to somehow get him when he's most vulnerable. And that's what this image shows. She not only cut off the buffalo's head, but as his true demon form is escaping out of the neck hole, which is what you see, that's when she strikes again. That's when she shoots him with all those arrows, strikes him with her sword, attacks her, with all that she has, and is able to finally defeat him. And that's how Durga is the best. All right. There are a couple of other goddesses we could talk about, but I think just for sake of time, we'll skip that. Melissa, if you could skip a couple of slides, if you could go down 5 slides. Yeah, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Local temple shrines. So these are the kinds of shrines that you would see if you were in India, if you were in a temple like the one in Castleberry. Once you kind of know who these really famous gods are and goddesses, you can recognize them. So now this isn't the one in Castleberry. This is another picture I got from a temple. But you can start to see a lot of the figures that came up today. So on the left, guy playing a flute with a woman on his arm, that's clearly Krishna and Radha. Right in the center, guy with trident with dreadlocks and his wife next to him, that's clearly Shiva with Parvati. And then right at the very end, these 3 figures, 2 brothers with bow and arrow and a wife, that's got to be Ram, Lakshman, and Sita from the Ramayana. So when you're familiar with these stories and with these characters, if you ever do get a chance to visit the Castleberry temple, or if you ever go to India and visit temples there, you can start to recognize